What's up, WordPress nerds? In this video, I'm going to be going over the do's and don'ts of freelancing with WordPress. So if you're new to the channel, make sure to subscribe and ring the bell to make sure you get notified of my weekly WordPress videos. All right, let's jump into it. All right, so I wanted to start off with the do's of WordPress freelancing. So here's some kind of like tips and tricks that if you are currently doing freelance or if you're thinking about doing freelance, here's some things that might help you out. So the first do that I think that is the most important is that you have to have a contract. There is nothing more important out of anything in this list than this item right here. If you don't have a contract, you put yourself in a lot of danger. There is a lot of leeway for them to not pay you or to come at you legally. Can't stress enough that you need to have a contract, and there are lots of kind of boilerplates out there. You can make your own, but here is a link to one that I start from. Now, it doesn't have everything I want in it, but it usually does a pretty good job of hitting a lot of bullet points. So I would grab this one and then I would edit it to fit your needs. So the thing that you want to make sure that you have in there is you have to know when the project starts. So what all the things you need to get started are, when it is considered complete, and how you will be paid. And we'll talk a little bit more about those in some future slides. But there's going to be kind of a gather phase where you get everything. Then there's going to be an execution phase. And then there's going to be a completion phase, and those things need to be outlined in the project. Then there's a lot more that needs to go in there, but like I said, we'll talk a little bit more about it here in the next slide or two. So getting a clear outline of the project. This is going to kind of go hand in hand with the contract. So if you are just saying like, yeah, I'm going to build you a website, like that could mean 1,000 different things, 1,000,000 different things. And expectations are not managed on your part or on their part, and a lot of confusion is going to happen. They're going to think that they're getting one thing. You think you should be building something else. It makes so much sense to just be overly specific. So it's better to be too specific than not specific enough. So if you are building a store, you need to know how they plan on shipping those items. You need to know how they plan on managing products through an importer or something like that. You need to know what the design is, where it's coming from, who's in charge of it, who's in charge of content. So are you going to be doing that? Are you going to be entering in all of the links and their paragraphs about the About Us? And are you going to be gathering photos of the team? Those are all things that you need to know. And it should be outlined in the contract who's in charge of what. And are they expecting to be able to move content around? Usually as developers, we get handed a design document, but it's up to our interpretation to know whether or not that's a static template or if that is a reusable list of components that we're seeing. So you should check with and make sure that, first of all, that the design is capable of doing that. And second of all, if the client is expecting something like that. And if you are building out something like that for them, that should go into your price. You need to know if you are working with any API integrations, if they have like a CRM or if they have, like an API that is going to be feeding data into the website. If they're going to have a shopping cart, are they looking to be able to just import data through a CSV or something like that? These are the kind of things that you should be outlining in the contract. On top of that, there is hosting and billing and plugins and all the who's paying for what, where these things are, where they're being hosted. Do they have special plugins that they need installed on the site? For example, like HubSpot or something like that, which is a CRM. Like you need to be able to get that plugin and have their login credentials and all this kind of stuff. Lots of things to gather at the beginning. I could spend an entire video talking about the things to look for. So if you guys want me to spend more time on this, let me know down in the comments and I'll make another video. So after that, The billing tip that I want to give you is charging by milestones and a fixed price. Hourly is a little bit hard to grasp for me. Like, I tried it, I didn't like it. I felt like I was just charging people to have my butt in my chair. And I found that this is a really good way to bill clients. And so kind of what this might look like is that you're going to have your project. Now that you have a clear outline of the project, you can break it down into milestones that make sense for your project. So this is not, gospel. This is not like how you should do everyone, but here's just a quick example that I came up with. And so the first milestone is the homepage, because what does that say? The homepage is a huge milestone because that gets the header, it gets the footer, it gets basic styles and typography. It means your local environment is set up. It means you've got the wheels turning. It means that your project is actually underway at this point. So milestone number 1, you should charge a fixed price for that. After that, maybe you do a couple more pages like the about, the contact, and the blog, because the blog includes category pages. That includes a single post. That includes search. Did I say search? Those kind of things that you would expect to go along with the blog. That encompasses a lot. So that would be a second milestone. Let's say that this is a WooCommerce store. So you have to have your store archive and your single pages. That's going to entail a lot of styling and setup. The checkout process in of itself, that kind of thing, where you can set up proper shipping methods and payment gateways and all this kind of stuff. Another milestone means another payment. And then finally launch. So you now have a completed site that's, kind of the brochure end and then the store end. And then once you launch that site and get that okay and you push that button, that's when you should get your fifth and final payment in this scenario. So this is the way that I've done it, and I find it to be very good because many times it can be that the client wants to really hold on to that final payment because they don't feel like as soon as they give it to you, you might like bolt or something like that. So doing half up front, half at the end simply doesn't work for me, where I found that if I'm getting, smaller checks along the way, you start to build a rapport with the person and you start to get, become more, you start to have more trust because you're completing work, you're getting money, like all this, like it's happening on both sides. So I would highly recommend doing it this way. So this one's a little bit more of an edge case, but having a plugin policy once you have launched the site, and this depends on your relationship with the client. If you plan on being the person that's in charge of the site, like they're going to come to you when they need to install plugins and things like that, like that's the kind of relationship you need with the client in order for this to work. But if you plan on having a long-term relationship with a client, this should be totally fine. Using things like Bedrock and using Composer to install the plugins and manage versions of plugins, because if you just install something in the WordPress dashboard and click update, no matter if you're 3 versions behind or a minor version behind, you're going to go to the latest, and that could be a problem. So I would suggest trying to convince the client to let you kind of manage that. You're going to have to be careful for not overcharging them or making it seem like you are trying to just be like, here's another thing that you're going to have to pay me for. But if you really sell that, like, hey, this is what's the best for security, it kind of puts it through a vetting process. If you're trying to install a plugin that has malware, which I've seen on Reddit, like, over the past couple of weeks, hundreds of thousands of sites are getting hit by these plugins that have vulnerabilities in it. Elementor was one of them recently. And so that affects so many sites. And these are things that can be avoided if you're carefully managing and watching what vulnerabilities are happening in which plugins. And so you can say like, all right, well, we're going to roll back a minor version because in that next minor version, there was a vulnerability. That is a huge thing that a client wants to hear, that you have their safety in mind. Same thing goes with WordPress core. You don't want them to just keep clicking the update WordPress core button. But I mean, at the end of the day, if they're just like no go on this whole thing, then think about putting something in the contract that says you're not responsible for anything that happens with like the plugins and their effects. So if they install a bunch of different slider plugins and throw them all on the home page, and then they come to you saying like, well, you built my site, but my site is now slow, make it faster. It's like, whoa, like I can't be responsible for every plugin that you install. And so that's what a thing that you're going to have to be like really clear about. So having a plugin policy is only going to help you. Well, not only going to help you, it's going to just help everybody. So the next thing that I want to make sure that you are aware of is that you should clean up the admin before you actually hand it off to the client. This is the fun stuff that you get to see in the back end of WordPress when you install a bunch of plugins and it looks real bad. First of all, it cheapens kind of what you did because it's like, oh, it just looks like you installed a bunch of plugin and great, I get a bunch of spam here in the back end. And that's not something that you want, especially if you want to kind of sell yourself as a professional who knows what they're doing. Like, this is the kind of stuff that you want to make sure to avoid. And when I say that, it's not just these kind of annoying like pop-ups that we see here. It's more about disabling stuff in the sidebar. Like if you're using advanced custom fields, there's really no reason why the client should have access to that. So maybe setting up yourself up a custom user role or them a custom role where they're not allowed to see that and they're not touching things that could potentially break the site. Because if they start just deleting fields because they're like, what are these? And all of a sudden the front end breaks, like, you know, that's a bad situation to be in. So cleaning up the sidebar, cleaning up this kind of stuff, it's only going to help you out. It's only going to make things feel better for the client when they're actually using the site. So another big tip, and I like this one a lot, is contacting agencies for extra work. In my area alone, I live in Salt Lake City, and so there's a lot of tech companies around here, and I have the luxury of knowing that many of these agencies work with WordPress to some degree, meaning that they sometimes build sites in them, sometimes they don't. Sometimes they get a lot of clients who want to be on WordPress, and sometimes they don't. And staffing up for those influxes of WordPress sites can be tricky. And the developers of that agency could be locked in on other projects that are more pressing. So what I would suggest is that you contact these agencies and say, hey, if you ever have an influx of WordPress work or something like that, give me a call. And you can do the same kind of thing that we talked about earlier is, just having a contract, or they might have a contract for you. And it essentially you're kind of in a mini contract position that it doesn't have to last, years on end or anything like that. But it's a great way to pick up extra stuff. And it's not always complete projects. Sometimes it's like marketing tasks where they just need to update some stuff here and there. So if you want to make a few bucks here and there, you can also try and establish that relationship. But I highly recommend this one because you can find not only a great you can not only find a lot of work, but you can make great connections along the way, meaning that, as you talk to the designer that you're going to be working with to finish this site, they take on freelance stuff outside of work too. And you are as well. So like they could have work for you that's not involved in this agency as well. So now you're kind of opening yourself up to, more long-term relationships with even more people. So you can kind of leapfrog and find a lot more work that would be worth doing. So a couple of don'ts is don't use a headless setup. Man, I don't like this one because I really like using headless WordPress. It's like one of my favorite things to play with. But there is a scenario where you can use it, and you get explicit permission from the client that this is something that you want to do. And I'm not saying that this is not worth pursuing or not worth asking, but it definitely has some downsides right now. So you don't get any plugins. There's the potential build times and some unexpected behavior. So it's still kind of a shaky process in some areas. And so if your client is thinking like, I'm getting WordPress, and they have this idea of what they're going to be able to do with that site once you hand it off to them, having a headless WordPress setup and they have no idea is going to prove to be, a bad look on you. They're going to try and install plugins and it's not going to work, and they're going to be all sorts of confused. And like I said, it's not worth bringing up to them. There's a lot of benefits to having a headless setup and throwing something like Gatsby on the front end and all the speed performance boosts that you're going to get there. But that is just something you're going to have to bring up to your client and have that discussion with them. Don't accidentally become a host. I feel like this one has grabbed onto a lot of WordPress developers, is that they are taking care of hosting for a lot of people. And that doesn't mean that you have a server at your home. That means that you are just having everybody either on your own hosting account, or that you are now all of a sudden the person that they go to for questions about their hosting. Like, the relationship between the client and the hosting company needs to be different than the relationship that you have with them. So you, as the developer, are not, managing their host. On top of that you could, have a preferred host that you like to use, and you can, refer them and say, hey, you know what? I'm not going to host your site, but, this other company could. And you get some little referral money if you do it that way. But it's just stuff that you don't want to have to get phone calls about at 2 a.m. in the morning when they think you're the person that does all of this. So that's something that I've encountered that I want you to avoid. Next is kind of along the same lines. It's don't manage clients' plugin licenses. You don't want to be hey, I need $50 for this plugin that you want to use on your site. And then when the year is up, when that plugin's, support is done or its license is up, you don't want to be tracking, a client down 12 months later, especially if you don't work with them anymore, to get reimbursed for another $50 or something like that. However, you do have, there are such things as developers and unlimited sites and lifetime licenses. And if you're feeling generous, go for it. The thing that I would say to caution you against that is, like, if you do end up severing ties with that person, there is a scenario where you all of a sudden become responsibility for the functionality of that plugin. You might want to think about that before you throw your own licenses on a client site. Don't do a bad job. Hey, that's an easy one. I don't mean that to like harp on anybody or anything like that, because this can come from either poor execution, like I just didn't know what I was doing, I got in over my head, or it's poor planning. And so going back to having a clear outline of the project, this could come down to just bad expectations on either your side or their side. So having clear expectations is key. So don't bite off more than you can chew. That kind of goes back to don't spread yourself too thin. So if you do great work for great clients, then you're going to be able to have a good relationship with them, and you're going to maybe get referred to other clients as well. So the better work that you do for these people, the better off you are. So the last one that I want to talk about here is don't do cheap work for cheap clients. It's a saying that I heard, and I really liked it because ultimately there are plenty of developers, on Fiverr and just out there on Craigslist that will do the cheap work for cheap clients. And honestly, it's going to be a waste of your time to be doing stuff like that. You want to be selling yourself as kind of a premium developer who knows what they're doing, who's going to do custom stuff for somebody, and you can be able to actually end up making good money off of that and potentially a living. So I would stay away from doing low dollar amount work for anybody, because when you kind of get into that tier of clients, they expect a lot for not a lot of money. That's just my experience, and I know the experience of a lot of other people. So, developer beware in that of that. And this is kind of a tip in of itself. If you are starting out, and you need clients to work with, reach out to a charity. I've done this on one or two occasions, and I didn't get paid for it at all. It was simply something that I did to help these guys out. And number one, it's super fulfilling, especially when you make an impact on the project. We did one, and the amount of donations that this charity received was record breaking for them. And so that was really cool to see. And not only that, it helped out with my portfolio and on this kind of stuff. So if you're building a portfolio, or hey, you're feeling charitable, this is a great place to start. Charities don't have a lot of money to get web developers, especially ones who know what they're doing. So if you want to reach out and say, hey, you know what? Your site's not looking so great, I can definitely help you out. I'd be happy to do it for free. And in that case, the one that I'm talking about, they sent essentially a receipt to me so I could write off the work that I did on my taxes, giving me a nice little tax break. So you don't get nothing out of it, but I think it's really an awesome way to spend either extra time or build a portfolio. So if you need a portfolio, go for charities. If you don't need a portfolio, definitely set your bar pretty high for the types of clients that you want. So I appreciate you guys watching, honestly. Thank you for the support as you've watched my videos. It's meant a lot. I really hope that you got something out of this video. I've been doing freelance for some time now, so I hope that these do's and don'ts help you avoid some failures and help get you on the right track. So anyway, thank you guys, and I will see you in the next one.